Dust rose in pale ribbons above the county fairground as the auctioneer's voice cracked across the morning air. The corral was ringed with weathered faces, ranchers with folded arms and boots coated in red dust, their eyes trained on the line of horses being paraded before them. Some were tall and shining, muscles rippling under coats brushed until they glimmered like polished bronze. Those animals drew nods of approval, the rhythmic rise of bidding paddles, and the confident laughter of men who believed themselves masters of value. Then came the one no one wanted. It limped into view, a bay gelding with a dull hide and ribs sharp enough to show through. A scar cut jagged across its flank, and one ear twitched as though haunted by memories no one else could see. The animal lowered its head and avoided every gaze, refusing even to meet the auctioneer's whip-crack command. A few men chuckled. Someone muttered, "That one's not worth the oats to keep it alive." Another voice louder sneered, "That's the kind you ship for dog feed." The auctioneer cleared his throat, his tone brittle with impatience. Lot 42. 5 years old. Sound enough for light work. The description hung in the air, so thin it nearly collapsed under its own lie. "Who'll start me at 50? Silence. The crowd shuffled. Some looked at their boots, others simply turned their heads away, already anticipating the next prize to be brought out. The bay shifted uneasily, one hoof dragging through the dust as if it knew rejection too well. The auctioneer tried again, his voice sharper, angrier. "Come on, folks. 25. 10. Surely somebody here wants him." Nobody moved. At the far edge of the ring, a man rested his weight against the rail. His hat cast a shadow across a face marked by sun and distance, a jawline roughened with days of stubble. He wore no flashy spurs or polished boots, only a canvas coat faded to the color of the earth. His eyes, though, steady hazel flecked with amber, did not slide away from the horse like the others. He studied the bay with the same patience he might use to weigh the sky before a storm. The auctioneer sighed, already lifting his hand to wave the animal away. "Fine then. I'll take him." The words were quiet, spoken without flourish. For a moment, no one seemed to know from where they'd come. Then all eyes swung toward the cowboy at the rail. He didn't shift under their gaze. He simply straightened, one hand resting loosely against the worn leather of his belt, and repeated, "I'll take him." A ripple of laughter surged through the crowd. Someone slapped his knee. "You serious, Mercer? You just bought yourself a nightmare." Another voice added, "Man's ranch is already hanging by a thread, and now he's feeding scraps to a cripple." The auctioneer blinked, then shrugged. "Sold for $5. His gavel hit the block with a flat crack, as though even the wood refused to waste energy on the sale. The cowboy stepped into the pen. Dust swirled around his boots as he reached for the rope tied loosely around the horse's neck. The gelding flinched, muscles twitching, but the man didn't jerk or rush. He stood still until the trembling quieted, then gathered the rope with hands calloused but steady. A soft murmur, low enough that only the horse could hear, slipped from his mouth. Whatever words they were, they calmed the bay enough to take one stumbling step forward. Mockery followed him as he led the animal toward the gate. "Better off saving your money for whiskey, Mercer," someone shouted. Another man spat in the dirt. "That horse'll never work a day for you." The cowboy gave no answer. His expression remained unreadable, carved from a quiet resolve that did not bend to ridicule. He guided the horse into the sunlight beyond the ring, his stride unhurried, his back straight. The crowd's laughter thinned behind him, fading into the buzz of another lot being called. Yet a few eyes lingered, curious despite themselves. They watched as cowboy and broken horse crossed the fairground, the dust swallowing their trail. Out past the noise, the bay halted suddenly, tugging against the rope. The cowboy paused, waiting. For a heartbeat, the horse lifted its head. Its eyes met his, haunted, but alive. Something flickered there, faint as an ember buried under ash. The cowboy adjusted his grip, gave the rope a gentle slack, and spoke again in that same quiet murmur. The horse blinked, lowered its head, and stepped forward. No applause marked their departure, no recognition of what had just begun. Yet in the silence between hoofbeats and boots, a promise hung unspoken. What the world had mocked as worthless had been claimed, not out of pity, but belief. And though no one else could see it, something had shifted. The story of the broken horse was no longer ending. It was only just beginning. The ride back to the ranch was slow. The bay stumbled often, its gait uneven, every step sounding like a question of whether it could take another. The cowboy Mercer never hurried him. The sun had slid low by the time they reached the weathered gate, its paint peeled to bare wood. The ranch itself stood quiet against the horizon, fences sagging, the barn leaning slightly with age. It was no empire, no spread of endless green pastures, just a modest patch of land that had endured storms and years of lean harvests. Still, it was home, and now it had another mouth to feed. Inside the barn, the horse shied at the scent of hay, nostrils flaring, ears pinned back. Mercer kept his voice even, a steady hum of words as he unknotted the rope. The gelding jerked once, nearly breaking free, before collapsing into the far corner of the stall, sides heaving. Mercer stood outside the gate, watching. His hands remained still, not offering food yet, not reaching for a brush. Sometimes the first kindness was space. That night, he sat by the lantern on the porch, rolling a tin cup between his palms. The echoes of the crowd's laughter from the auction still lingered, sharp as barbed wire in his mind. He had known what they would say, had known it before he even lifted his hand. Waste of money, they'd sneer. Fool's errand. Maybe they were right. Yet when he closed his eyes, he saw the horse's glance in that one brief moment. Wary, beaten, but alive. And he remembered how that look mirrored his own once, years ago, when he had been left standing in the ashes of loss with nothing but the will to keep walking. Morning came with frost silvering the pasture. Mercer moved slowly, carrying a bucket of water and a small measure of oats to the stall. The horse's head lifted at the sound of boots, ears flicking back, eyes wide with suspicion. Mercer set the bucket down, then stepped away, leaning against the rail with his arms crossed. Minutes passed. The gelding pawed the ground, nostrils working, torn between hunger and fear. Finally, trembling, it lowered its muzzle and drank. Mercer allowed himself the faintest smile. One step, no matter how small, was still a beginning. Days slid into rhythm. He never forced contact, only stood nearby as the horse ate or drank, spoke softly as he mended tack or raked hay. Still, the gelding flinched at every sudden sound, every shadow across the door. Its body was a map of old injuries, marks left by whip, by rope, by men who had tried to break spirit with cruelty. Some scars healed, others wrote themselves into the bones. News traveled faster than horses in a town like theirs. By the week's end, neighbors dropped words heavier than gossip. A ranch hand passing the fence called out, "Better put that one down before it drags you into ruin." The blacksmith, shaking his head, muttered, "You can't fix what's already broken." Mercer never argued. He simply nodded, then went back to his work. Their words echoed, but they didn't bend him. One evening, as the light faded and shadows stretched long, he entered the stall carrying nothing but a brush. The horse shifted nervously, pressing back against the boards. Mercer stayed near the gate, brushing the air, letting the sound of the bristles carry. Minutes dragged. Then, with a hesitation so fragile it felt like glass, the bay stepped forward. Its muzzle hovered near his sleeve, breath warm against cloth. Mercer moved slowly, raising the brush until it touched the coarse mane. The horse stiffened, eyes rolling, but then stayed. He brushed once, twice, each stroke deliberate, patient as rain wearing down stone. The silence inside the barn grew softer, as if even the rafters understood the weight of the moment. For the first time, the gelding did not retreat. Mercer lowered the brush, his hand lingering near the animal's neck. He whispered again, words too quiet for any ear but the horse's. Promises, perhaps, or confessions of a man who had carried his own share of scars. The gelding's ear flicked toward him. It was not trust, not yet, but it was the start of something that had not existed before. Outside, night folded over the land. Stars emerged, sharp and cold. Inside the barn, a man and a horse stood within the fragile hush of a truce, bound by wounds no one else had cared to see. The world beyond might laugh, might scorn, might wait for failure. But in the dim glow of the lantern, Mercer could feel it. The story was shifting, step by step, towards something the doubters would never expect. Winter gave way slowly, the frost reluctant to release its grip on the valley. Each morning, Mercer led the bay into the round pen, the rope loose in his hands, his steps measured and steady. At first the horse circled frantically, eyes rolling, hooves pounding divots into the damp earth. Mercer said little, letting silence settle between them, the kind of silence that taught patience more than any whip ever could. Day by day, the circle slowed. The horse's breathing evened, its ears turned toward him rather than away. What began as fear was softening into recognition. Progress, however, came at the pace of wounds, not at the pace of men's ambitions. There were setbacks, moments when the gelding froze at the brush of a rope against its flank, or collapsed trembling after only a few paces beneath a saddle's weight. Mercer bore each moment with a quiet endurance, though the bruises on his arms and the limp in his step spoke of the toll. He knew healing rarely moved in a straight line. It faltered, stumbled, retreated before inching forward again. The townsfolk noticed, and not kindly. At the feed store, men leaned on sacks of grain, shaking their heads. "That horse'll never carry weight," one declared. Another smirked. Mercer's chasing ghosts, trying to fix what's past fixing. Their laughter carried, but Mercer kept his eyes on the ledger, his answers clipped and neutral. He had no interest in persuading them. His faith was not for sale. One evening, while the sun bled red over the horizon, Mercer saddled the bay for the first time. His motions were unhurried, each strap tightened with care, every buckle checked twice. The horse quivered, muscles taut as wire, but it did not bolt. Mercer laid a hand against its neck, feeling the thunder of its heartbeat beneath his palm. He swung up slowly, settling into the worn leather, his weight balanced and still. The gelding shifted, stumbled, then stood. For a long moment, man and horse simply breathed together. The silence felt like a threshold crossed. It was not triumph, not yet. The first ride was a halting crawl around the pen, Mercer murmuring steady encouragement, the bay trembling but moving. Each faltering step was a declaration against the voices that had called it worthless. By the time he dismounted, sweat darkened the horse's coat, and Mercer's throat was raw from speaking. Yet in his eyes there glimmered the smallest spark of vindication. Later that week, word spread of the spring rodeo. Posters flapped on fence posts, promising prize money and bragging rights, a contest of endurance and speed. Mercer heard the talk in town, heard the rival ranchers boasting of the champions they would bring. At first he ignored it. His focus was on healing, not proving anything. But as days passed, the thought took root. The rodeo wasn't about glory. It was about showing that broken things could still stand, still fight, still carry weight against the odds. When Mercer signed his name on the entry sheet, a hush fell over the table of officials. One of them glanced up, incredulous. "With that horse?" Another laughed outright. "You'd best prepare for embarrassment." Mercer only nodded, collected his stub of a ticket, and walked away. Training grew harder. He pushed the bay further each morning, riding longer, guiding it over low rails, coaxing it into sharper turns. There were falls. Once the horse stumbled and sent him crashing into the dirt, breath knocked clean from his lungs. He lay there for a moment, staring at the sky, before rising, dusting himself off, and climbing back into the saddle. The gelding trembled, but followed his cue. Neither quit. At night, alone in the barn, Mercer leaned against the stall door, watching the horse eat. He thought of the laughter, the jeers, the certainty in others' voices that they would fail. He also thought of his own reflection in the horse's wary eyes. How alike they were, both carrying scars the world had no patience for. Perhaps that was why he could not give up. To see the horse falter was to see his own reflection surrender, and that was a fate he refused. The rodeo drew nearer. The townsfolk whispered louder. Some called it madness. Others placed quiet bets against him. Yet when Mercer saddled the bay and guided it beneath the wide Montana sky, he felt no madness. He felt the steady hum of resolve, a weightless thread of trust binding him to the animal no one else believed in. By the final week, the gelding no longer circled in panic. It moved with him, each shift of Mercer's body answered by a step, a turn, a surge forward. They were not flawless, but they were united. And sometimes, unity was stronger than perfection. The night before the rodeo, the barn lay in silence save for the creak of rafters and the slow rhythm of the horse's breath. Mercer rested his hand against the gelding's scarred flank, whispering once more in that voice meant only for them. The horse flicked an ear, lifted its head, and pressed closer. The world was waiting to see them fail. Tomorrow, they would answer. The fairground smelled of dust, sweat, and anticipation. Banners snapped in the breeze, bright against the pale sky, while the stands filled with townsfolk hungry for spectacle. Riders in polished boots and gleaming tack paraded their mounts with pride, the horses tossing their heads, muscles taut with training and confidence. Laughter and wagers passed between neighbors, most of it at Mercer's expense. Whispers trailed him like shadows. Fool's about to humiliate himself. That horse won't last the first turn. Mercer ignored the noise. He tightened the cinch with practiced hands, his motions calm, deliberate. The bay stood still beneath him, ears flicking nervously at the commotion, but no longer shrinking away from every sound. Its coat, though still scarred, caught the light with a sheen that weeks ago would have been unthinkable. Mercer placed a hand against its neck, steadying them both. He wasn't here for applause. He was here to prove that broken things could still rise. The announcer's voice boomed, calling riders to the starting line. One by one they gathered, proud stallions stamping, nostrils flaring. Mercer guided the bay into place at the far end. The crowd quieted briefly, eyes narrowing at the sight of the scarred horse among champions. A murmur rippled. Curiosity sharpened with ridicule. The pistol cracked. Horses lunged forward, hooves tearing the earth. Dust exploded into the air, the sound of thunder rolling across the arena. The bay faltered at the start, stumbling as the pack surged ahead. Jeers erupted from the stands. "Told you so," someone shouted. But Mercer leaned low, voice low and urgent. A steady rhythm of words meant only for the gelding. The horse's stride steadied, the tremble in its legs giving way to something stronger. They pushed forward. The first turn came sharp. Rivals cut close, their mounts slicing through the curve with practiced ease. Mercer guided the bay wider, sacrificing ground for balance. The crowd groaned, already dismissing them, but on the back stretch, something shifted. The horse stretched its neck, lungs pulling deep, strides lengthening. Dust streamed behind as it began to close the gap, overtaking one, then another. Gasps replaced laughter. Halfway through, sweat darkened Mercer's shirt, his jaw set with focus. The gelding surged beneath him, no longer the trembling shadow that had cowered in the auction pen. Its eyes burned with fierce clarity, each stride a declaration that it would not be forgotten, not discarded. Mercer whispered encouragement, his voice breaking but relentless. Together, they moved as if sharing a single heartbeat. Then came the obstacle. A shallow ditch across the track, the kind that tested both courage and trust. Horses ahead cleared it easily, their riders confident. When Mercer reached it, the bay hesitated, hooves skidding, fear flashing in its eyes. The crowd roared in cruel triumph, certain of failure. Mercer bent close, his hand firm against its neck. "You can," he murmured. His voice held no command, only belief. The horse leapt. For an instant they hung suspended, the world silent but for the rush of air. Then hooves struck earth, solid and true. The base stumbled, recovered, and surged forward, driving with renewed power. The crowd's noise changed, shouts now mixed with awe. They would not win first place. The leading riders were too far ahead, their mounts too seasoned. But as the final stretch opened before them, Mercer and the bay were no longer the joke of the field. They thundered across the line mid-pack, not in glory, but in undeniable triumph. The stands fell into stunned silence before applause broke like rain. People rose to their feet, clapping, some even cheering, not because they had seen a champion, but because they had witnessed a resurrection. Mercer slowed the horse to a walk, his hand brushing the damp mane. The bay's sides heaved, nostrils flaring, but its head lifted high, eyes bright. Mercer leaned close, his words carried away by the roar around them. "Told you they were wrong." In that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the wagers lost, not the sneers silenced. What mattered was the bond forged in silence and scars, the proof that faith and patience could carve strength from ruin. As he led the bay out of the arena, the crowd parted to let them pass. Some reached out to touch the horse. Others simply watched with expressions softened by something close to shame. Mercer kept his gaze forward, shoulders square, his hands steady on the lead rope. The fairground behind them hummed with stories that would be retold for years. But for Mercer and the horse, the world narrowed to each other. The man who refused to give up, and the animal who learned to trust again. Their journey was not over. It had only just begun.